Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending upon which part of the world you are in currently. My name is Satyam Vyas. I'm the founder and CEO of Climate Asia. Climate Asia is a not-for-profit dedicated to strengthening the climate ecosystem in Asia through capacity building of organizations focusing on human resource, organizational development, and thought leadership. We will accomplish this by building a movement to inspire people to work in the climate ecosystem, a digital platform to find climate jobs, climate funding, events, news, and thought leadership in the form of research and dialogue building. Climate Asia endeavors to create conversations around three pillars: share, empower, and connect, by increasing awareness, upskilling the ecosystem, and catalyzing networking amongst the players within and outside the industry. We have launched this series, Conversation of Change, a video interview series centered around one of the most pertinent crises of our time, climate change. Conversations of Change attempt to synthesize perspectives around climate action, skills, talent, and journey of various climate leaders and their role in the climate ecosystem. I'm honored today to have with me Samir Shisodia, the CEO of Rainmatter Foundation. Welcome on board, Samir.
Thanks, Satyam. Glad to be here. And thanks to start with for doing what you're doing. I think we need millions of change makers involved in acting against the problems we are facing right now.
Thank you, Samir. We are equally honored to have you with us today. I would like to just give a brief background about our speaker. So Samir heads the Rainmatter Foundation, developing projects and building funding and investment programs, among many other things. Samir left his long career in the tech industry a decade ago and partly moved to beautiful Coorg to experiment with sustainable farming, farm collectives, and his personal passion, rejuvenating soil and forest. He runs Linger as a hobby and shares his thought regularly on his blog. Samir, I would say that everything I have read about Samir and everything Samir posts about, it gives you a holistic understanding of what's happening in society, economy, and governance. So please do follow Samir and his thinking and philosophy. With that, I'm super excited, Samir, to jump at it and really begin with, if you can just talk about Rainmatter Foundation and what is your role as a CEO at the Rainmatter Foundation?
My role at the Rainmatter Foundation is more of an orchestrator. We almost look at everybody in the team and everybody we are working with as fellows who are trying to pursue specific directions. What Rainmatter itself is trying to do is taking on climate as an umbrella problem, trying to go to the root causes of it, and trying to address it in ways that will actually make a large enough dent in the problem. So this, of course, needs us to look at it, not just from a carbon lens, not just from a temperature lens, but also the ecological degradation, the underlying structures, the behaviors, the construct of the economy, the construct of society that has led up to this. So it sounds like a grand problem we've taken on, but we also realize that unless you look at it from a systems lens and holistically, you're not actually solving it. So that's what we're trying to do.
Very happy to hear that. I mean, I've been reading this book, which probably you have read too. But what I really liked about this book is showing this to our team is the goal section, which is like the 5 bullet points of reaching net zero by 2050. Any of those 1, 2, or 3 core things Rainmatter Foundation is focusing on?
So over the last couple of years now, we've been chasing down a bunch of questions around, like I said, the root causes. This has been framed as energy and mobility transition worldwide. But we started asking the question around why do you need so much mobility, and why do you need so much energy? Where is this going? Where is this apportioned? What are the different uses, and are all of them efficient? Are all of them needed? Are there alternatives to doing that, and so on and so forth? So a lot of our answers are to be found in the food systems, in urban design, in the construction industry overall, in the urban design, and so on and so forth, in fabrics. So I think looking at these problems fundamentally has led us to a couple of tactical responses. And one is that we've started characterizing climate as a place problem. Mm-hmm. What happens to a place? It's like at your home, right? You have a sense of the house. You understand when things are okay and when things are not okay. And you're not going to sacrifice even one of the variables on health, nutrition, incomes, water, education of the kids at home, and so on and so forth. If any one of these variables falls below a certain threshold, you double down and fix it. But in our places, in our cities, in our village clusters, in our administrative blocks, and so on and so forth, we regularly optimize for one variable and make bad trade-offs on the other. Most of these bad trade-offs have been made in the commons, in our water situation, in the soil health, in air quality, and so on and so forth, which is what we call externalized costs. And as a result, all places have suffered. So it's become important to us to get communities and administrative parts of our governance to grapple with what defines a place, what do you track in a place holistically. How are you able to make better trade-offs? Because I think the best way to solve the climate problem is really to do better trade-offs in the next trillion things we do at every scale.
Right. Great to hear that. You're absolutely correct, Samir. I mean, we have done many, many bad trade-offs, I would say, in trying to live a certain kind of lifestyle, replicate what has been happening around the world without questioning as you started out with, deep root causes of how much fossil fuel has penetrated every aspect of our life, which actually is not even visible. I mean, we just think that, it's the oil and gas, but how everything we consume is oil and gas, and everything around us is oil and gas, is something worth educating everyone in this planet at this point in time, because that industry in the last 50 years has flourished and have sort of penetrated every aspect of the machines we are using to have this conversation, to everything we do. But with that, Samir, I'm also equally excited to learn more about you came from a tech background and then you moved towards sustainable farming, rejuvenating soil and forests, and now you head developing projects and investments at Rainmatter Foundation. How would you describe your career journey in this space, and what were your key learnings as you transitioned from one industry to another?
My path has been one of serendipity and accidents, really. I quit. I kind of started to quit tech. I did product management for a bit on the side. I quit tech primarily because I was chasing questions on what my impact is on this planet. Where does my work go? What happens because of it? So Linger happened as an outcome of that question. And then as I started to operate more in non-tier 1 and tier 2 India, you live in a bubble in the cities. And as you step out of that bubble, a lot of questions pop up. A lot of things become apparent that were not apparent when you were, in Bangalore, making sorties here and there, but not really interacting with the place. So I think that journey led me to questions around our food systems and agriculture systems, our relationship with most of the landscape, right? Most of the people there. And so natural farming was almost like a natural reaction to this, trying to understand permaculture, trying to understand natural farming. A bunch of us who've been thinking of how can we live better as communities, as opposed to how we live in our apartment communities these days, were already discussing these, and food became a part of that discussion. So the farming collectives happened as a reaction. In a couple of years after I started doing that, I realized that each of these collectives was a great response for the people involved. It taught us a lot of things. It rejuvenated that 100 acres or what you will. But it barely made a dent in the village itself. Forget the larger picture. Right. So the questions became larger. The quest became larger. I am still involved in the collective that I'm a member in, but I kind of started pursuing these other questions and stopped creating more collectives and so on and so forth. Rainmatter was a complete accident. Nitin and I got accidentally talking about Zerodha's plans for livelihoods, for addressing climate change through afforestation and so on and so forth. And, they needed somebody to focus on this, push this along a few directions. And I had already quit doing everything and was chasing this as an individual. So the paths intersected nicely, and here we are.
I like the way you started with serendipity, a classic case of serendipity for a larger cause versus like sometimes chasing an algorithm, or a compass to find a direction. But great to hear that, Samir. And now when it comes to, I know you touched upon many things. You touched upon society, you touched upon forests, you touched upon agriculture. Also, your understanding of this entire economy. Now, if we have to prepare a future workforce for climate, what do you think are some of the core skills we are looking at, both from a technical and non-technical perspective? And I would like to focus on technical and non-technical, Samir, because we need technical experts. It is a scientific problem, but we also need to build a movement of people who come from all walks of life to imbibe this in their life. And it's one of those things where every time I run this social experiment, I bump into someone and say, would you like to solve for a climate problem? They say yes. I say, how would you do it? They don't have an answer. So, so I guess if you want to shed some of your views around skills, expertise, and how to sort of build a movement of people to work in this space.
So it's funny you emphasize the point around the scientific part of the problem, because across the world, that's not just in the Indian context, governments, society, industry, they are almost refusing to acknowledge the science on it.
Right.
You're seeing a lot of scientists are going out there and protesting this in big ways now because they are frustrated about the lack of movement and the lack of acknowledgement of the problem, as it were. Right. So we are actually trailing on science.
Right.
So many more people need to acknowledge and be able to consume the science, build in what the learnings from there are into their plans, into their professions, into their daily lives. Right. And it boils down to the better trade-offs, really. Right. So renewables, for instance, are one answer to it. How do you actually plan energy better? It's a CEO's job. It's a operations manager's jobs. It's a administrator's job. It's a policymaker's job. An understanding of energy is critical to this world from here, for instance. So is systems thinking, because for too long, like I said earlier, we've been chasing one variable at the expense of the others. If you're chasing solutions in water or health or livelihoods, how do they intersect with energy? How do they intersect with soil? How do they intersect with waste? Right? Unless we develop a better understanding of systems thinking, start thinking of problems on a map of all of these variables simultaneously. And this is sorely missing because nothing in our education actually pushed us into any kind of systems thinking at all. Right? You could be a top administrator, you could be a top planner. You are, like the joke goes, for G, you are asked to solve for X.
Right.
So we reduce the problem to one or two variables and we optimize for that. And that's what the professional of the last couple of decades, excelled at.
Right.
Our strength was supposed to be the hyper specialization that we all, were trained for. So I think we need people who can go deeper in grappling the complexity of the real world. Because the real world is complex and we've been dumbing it down too long. So systems thinking and understanding of emergent systems, where you understand the principles of a system and not necessarily finite outcomes. Right? For anybody in a policy, in a governance space, anybody solving large problems, this is very, very critical, because we are not going to solve it through one or two finite pathways to the problem. It's not like a transition from oil to solar is going to solve everything for us. Right? So you need those skills. And then there is also this aspect of not just understanding climate as a science or an administrative function, but also building it in each profession, in each role on the planet. Because honestly, it was born from bad trade-offs and everything, like we said. Right? You could be a designer, you could be an architect, you could be a farmer, you could be an administrator of a city, you could be a policymaker, you could be a politician. And you need to understand the role of climate, the role of ecology in what you do. So I think there's a broad capacity building in everything and understanding the fundamentals of ecology. But there's also deeper systems thinking. There's deeper understanding of emergent systems and of energy as a go-to thing. I think these are the skills that will stand us in good stead over the next couple of decades.
It's very interesting. You talk about Samir systems thinking and the emergent systems, and probably a lot of things that start happening in our life at a certain age. I mean, I always, again, a social experiment. I see how many young people are using the word systems versus how many people who have worked for a decade or two using the word systems, because I guess it also comes with a certain lens of maturity. And while you are in the education system in an emerging market like India, you are running pillar to post, as you rightly said. I mean, you boil it down to X, or cracking an exam Y, or getting a job Z. But you are largely being taught to run from one place to another, because that's how the society has constructed success for most of the people. And there's nothing wrong in it, keeping in mind that we also come from a poorer nation. I mean, we have millions and millions of people who just by focusing on X actually can, make a huge difference in their life and families. But it comes at a cost. So when people just start following the herd, so this herd mentality needs to probably stop at a certain point in time. And massive evolution of the education system is required, because the syllabus won't change. You and I can go to college, go to school, probably will be going through the same thing we would have studied 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that's not going to solve for the world we live in right now, currently. Samir, you also, in a recent article titled "How Gandhi's Ideas Can Lead Us Out of Climate Crisis," you explained how mass production option shifts values, causes loss of skills and biodiversity, and eventually a pricing power and economic dependence. Could you share a production practice that you greatly admire, being a farmer, and why?
I wish we had many good examples, but this is a problem we arrived at. We didn't start with Gandhian philosophy. I read Gandhi when somebody pointed out that the things we were arriving at had parallels in that. And somebody's actually recommended Kumarappa, so I'm going to read that as well. I think the examples are in the negative largely today. Any village cluster that we've been to is buying 70-80% of its daily basket of needs from very, very far away, usually from a town or a city. That's loss in economic value for sure, because it's all coming at MRP, of which any village across the country, any village cluster across the country, maybe 15-20% of it accrues to them. 85-90% of it sometimes accrues outside of these village clusters. And this is happening to almost 95% plus of village clusters across India, right, where the raw materials are coming from. The villages in turn are looking at selling 2 or 3 commodities that they grow, pushing the soil and water hard, right? And all of the commodities are sold at way below commodity prices. They're sold at cost plus in the best case. This math is never going to work out economically, but it also doesn't work out ecologically, because you're pushing the land, you're pushing the water, you are less dependent on biodiversity for your daily needs. The 750 species that grew around you are not needed anymore, and you focus on these three. So you push the farm, you push the edge of the village, you push the edge of the water bodies that you have, and you do not allow for most of these 750 species to exist anymore. So you have lack of diversity, you have bad water outcomes, bad soil outcomes, and bad economic and health, nutrition, all of that. So it's very evident that this is happening practically across India. Dipstick surveys also point to the level of economic loss that people incur because of this. And it's interesting that for these 2-3 commodities, people are always looking for markets elsewhere. And there's this large set of basket of needs. That's an opportunity for them right there. Some of them are simple. I mean, nobody's talking about producing mobile phones in rural India right now, but you can produce a pickle and your broom for sure. An average broom costs about $150 a pop these days, and that's grows in revenue in any cluster that you can go. So it's a little mad how this has worked out, and I think people like Gandhi and Kumarappa from where I hear saw this early.
Right.
So that's what the article was really about.
You're right. I remember you talking about the toothbrushes once, and
yeah, I stopped using them 4 years ago.
Yeah,
and it's quite alarming. When you add up the numbers across any cluster,
yeah,
they are not trivial numbers. Plus, you get all the plastic for free, and you have to deal with it for perpetuity.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely right. Completely makes sense, Amay. I mean, the more I think about it, the more you start understanding the complexities of it, both from a behavior lens, an economic lens, and a convenience lens. Sometimes, we have created things which are convenient but are bad for the planet. But it's not something visible.
So my question has always been that when we talk about, this is almost framed as a right of a consumer. But what about the right of a producer? Why isn't this seen as an opportunity and as something convenient for a producer to address? Why do we assume that the same set of people cannot be producers and don't want to be producers? Why would they let go of a 4 crore, 5 crore opportunity in their cluster? Right. So it's we always frame rights in a consumption sense, but I think the rights in a production sense are equally important.
Agreed. Samir, you have also authored a beautiful article on climate change, guilt, and helplessness, and addressed the fears by stating that the process is complex, but we need millions to fix it and account for the accumulated blind spots for all those edits. So as this climate disaster unfolds, young people are constantly reminding of their role in the problem and the implications of that problem. What advice would you give to young people to preserve their mental health as well as motivate them to save this planet as a collective?
I don't think we have to motivate them. I think a lot of them are going to be role models. People in my generation are not eco-natives. We didn't grow up with this information and discussion around us. We've had to acquire it. And intrinsically, most people in my generation at least, the markers for success are still a bigger car and a bigger house.
Right.
But a lot of people in the younger generation are wired differently. And even if they are not grappling with the problem on a daily basis now, they are the ones who will actually understand it better. They are the ones who actually drive the changes much better than any of us will. So I'm optimistic that the younger folks today are answer to this. It is very it is very daunting. It is sometimes little challenging to deal with it mentally, because it's a trillion different interactions on a daily basis across the planet that are contributing to it. So you can get daunted by what is my little contribution going to do, whether personally or professionally. But you have to start to visualize this as this large complex graph. And you have to imagine that this graph is going to look different a few decades from now, hopefully, right? Or at least 100 years from now. And it's going to look different because a lot of people make a lot of different changes, whether at the level of your household or your personal choices, or at the level of policy or your industry, or any kind of decision making you have access to. Right. So and to make this transition, we are going to use the tools that are available to us in the current graph. So the evident hypocrisy of it that can get to you is something to watch out for. We are having this conversation on the back of a lot of carbon. I am going to Bhubaneswar tomorrow to have a meeting to try and fix some of this, but I'm taking a flight. Right? These contradictions are going to be part of our lives, because you will use coal to invent the renewables for tomorrow. Right? And we have to deal with it. But we have to be able to imagine this other graph, completely different network of interactions and solutions, and constantly move towards it at whatever level we can. So my only advice to people solving this, especially the younger people, is to not get daunted by it and keep chipping away at it. But also not assume that any solution, any method is sufficient. It's a very large network of daily interactions of the economy, of our choices, and so on and so forth. And it will change over time. But we have to be at it, and millions of us have to be at it simultaneously.
I'm happy to hear about the optimism, Sami, that the young people are at least not chasing the goals which were defined as success from the past. And I can also sense very strongly the complexities of it, that it's not going to happen overnight. We have to actually, as you rightly said, we can't get rid of coal overnight, but we can use coal to transition towards renewable, which will also come at a cost of justice, I would imagine, because we are not that big a country when it comes to land. So a lot of these concepts of renewables requires a lot of land too, and our population density is insanely high. We are not United States of America, where you can have acres and acres of solar and renewable happening in different parts of the planet. But it's worth thinking what works in our context, because it has to work in our context long term. Sami, you're well known to utilize the habit of cycling during your commutes in Bangalore, or taking a bus and talking about it. What inspired you to cycle in a metropolitan city in this era where all I see in social media is water everywhere on the road? Actually, I don't see roads. I see water, and I see very, very fancy cars and water. That has been my image of current situation of what happens when it rains in a big city. And not just true for Bangalore, probably true for a lot of other metropolitan cities in the country. What do you think? I mean, what is cycle? How do you get more people to cycle?
Yeah, so I actually got reintroduced to cycling as an adult because of this thing called the Tour of Nilgiris. And a bunch of folks were riding out 800 kilometers across Karnataka, the Nilgiris, and so on and so forth. The tagline was also that everybody can cycle. So it was to make it possible for everybody that, if a bunch of folks 800 kilometers over 8 days, you can do your 8-9 kilometers to office. Right? And it actually did trigger. We actually did cycling workshops in various offices and apartment communities and so on and so forth. And it actually did trigger a lot of change. I personally have not been able to cycle as much as I would like to in the last couple of years. But I still try to, each opportunity to commute to a meeting, to your office, for shopping, etc., is an opportunity for a trade-off.
Right.
And when possible, can you make a better trade-off is the question in my head. Right? When I have time, a bus is it's a much better trade-off. Right? When the distance is not long and the weather is nice, I go cycling. I pick up a two-wheeler instead of a car. I hate being in a car all by myself. Right? And the Uber driver doesn't count.
Right.
Right. So it's a question of making, is it possible to make a better trade-off at this point of time? And it won't happen 100% of the time. Right? It'll start with 10% and graduate to 30%. But imagine a 30% change on fossil fuels and energy on the planet.
Right.
That's huge.
Right.
So I think it's more about that than of course, more cyclists on the road make the road safer. So more cyclists can be on the road. There are these tipping points that you can achieve. So part of the motivation is also that. But to be honest, I mean, there are very many more brand ambassadors in Bangalore doing some great work around this. Bangalore actually has a bicycle mayor. I know a bunch of friends who are very committed to it. So they are my inspiration, to be honest.
No, it completely makes sense. And it's one of those things which all of us, when we are young, we dream of doing. And as we grow old, we are out of that world. I mean, everything positive that happens in our upbringing, actually, you start letting go of it. Like you can start pretty much at a certain point of time, hitting 15, 16-year-old, when the aspiration changes from a cycle to a two-wheeler, that transition that happens. Also, the way the societal constructs are, right? I mean, what the society wants you to go towards and how it rewards you in that manner, that what you are driving, and big is better kind of thing. Like every year when I see a new iPhone and I see the ad bigger and better, like it can't get bigger than this your size. This is the size of your hand.
Yeah.
in a incremental value, it can't go beyond that.
Yeah.
You're right in terms of compounding of behavior change. Because countries like Netherlands, countries like Belgium, they are way ahead, rather the entire Europe, which is being more and more mindful of life choices. And I read an article which talked about how Belgium recently imposed 30 kilometers per hour speeding limit. And they are massively saving on the health infrastructure and while obviously in India, we'll never look at it from an intersectionality lens. We'll say, oh, health is in isolation. We don't necessarily know how much it costs based on an accident or a bad lifestyle, because we are not actually making those correlations. And no one is thinking about those correlations at scale. It might be happening in pockets. So completely agree with you, Sameer, on that front, that we need many, many brand ambassadors and probably like a movement to not necessarily drive unless until it's necessary. I mean, like you said, there are options. We have great public transport, and one should actually think of using it as much as possible. Sameer, I'm filled with optimism after this conversation. I think it's very positive. It touches upon every aspect of life and society and the world we live in, but it also comes with a ray of hope that we can solve for it if we do the better trade-offs, if I use that word. And it's all about trade-offs in terms of our daily activities and the choices we make. We just have to make the right choices and not necessarily go by what the popular media is promoting at any given point in time. So thank you so much, Sameer, for taking the time out to talking to us. All power to you for the incredible work you are doing. And I hope more and more people like you join this space and build this movement further. And you continue to do what you're doing for this planet.
Thanks, Satyam. And thanks for having me over. Thanks for having this discussion, and more power to you for creating many more change makers.